Welcome to Strip Cover Lit. I'm Dalton Gentry, and it is Friday, so we're here for part 6 of a lengthy series where we are breaking down How to Read Literature Like a Professor by Thomas C. Foster. This is episode 6 of How to Read Books Good, covering the chapter or the Bible. Now, last week we talked a little bit about good old Billy Wigglesticks, Shakespeare himself, that when in doubt, it's from Shakespeare. And we made that point over and over again that a lot of times authors steal from Shakespeare, which is fine. This is a normal practice. We are using things that our reader knows, things that our reader holds near and dear, to better further our point. And we made the argument that a lot of things can be drawn from Shakespeare. But there is another big one, another big option in which we draw from a lot, and that is the Bible. Now, we've said so on the channel many times before. If you followed along with our reading of A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, we actually had a discussion at the end about Adrian and I's religious beliefs. We both identify as atheists, but getting to that point has allowed us a lot of chance to read into and study religion. Therefore, a lot of times when we're doing reviews, we do tie things back to standard Judeo-Christian belief, because that is rampant in literature, and that's fine. That's a good thing. Religious symbolism and allusions are absolutely rampant when it comes to literature. This is because our reader is familiar with these topics. Even if you've never read the Bible, even if you don't associate yourself with the Bible, there are little things that are going to spark something in the back of your mind. Things that are incorporated in literature that are going to feel familiar with you because you're familiar with these stories. And maybe this isn't the case for everyone, but growing up in the Midwest, the Bible Belt of America, absolutely. These things are going to be ingrained into you from a young age, whether you like it or not. So if the author has the opportunity to play on that notion and to incorporate things in their novel, that might spark that idea or that emotion, that's a great thing to do. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. The Bible was for a very long time the end-all and be-all of the written world. And when you have a text that is going to be that influential and that big of a deal, it's obviously going to seep over into the literary world as well. I do have a bit of supplementary reading that I would suggest here. Normally with this series, every Friday, we try to tie things together in something we've reviewed in the past on Strip Cover Lit. You might be able to find an example of this in this review, so on and so forth. If you followed along through the series, you're going to be familiar. But a little bit of supplementary reading. This is from a Dr. Jeannie Crane, Reading the Bible as Literature. This is an analysis of the Bible as a literary text as opposed to a standard religious text, which is an interesting experiment to have here, but there are some great things in this that it's really going to help you pick up on a few literary ideas in some of your favorite books. For example, let us just dive right in. From page 10 of Reading the Bible as Literature, we're going to talk about the monomyth. A monomyth refers to a basic pattern in which a hero begins in the ordinary world, but receives a call to enter into an unknown and mysterious world of strange powers and events, where he must face tasks and trials alone or with assistance. Recognizable features include a miraculous birth, initiation at a young age, withdrawal, trial and quest, descent, resurrection and return, ascension, and atonement. Now, this is an example from Reading the Bible as Literature where they are aligning things together with Jesus and Moses and the monomythic and universal hero types. So that's going to start a little bit of a throwback here, and you're going to say to yourself, well, damn, that sounds a lot like a hero's journey. It's because it is. And where do we find this example in literature? In something that we've reviewed on the channel before, something we've talked about quite a bit? Harry Potter. That does sound like Harry Potter. Let's go over that one more time from page 10. What is a monomyth? A basic pattern in which a hero begins in the ordinary world, living with the Muggles. And he receives a call to enter into an unknown and mysterious world of strange powers and events. A letter? He's a wizard? Oh my! He must face these tasks and trials alone, or with assistance. Oftentimes Harry is pitted against the big bad by himself, but he receives assistance from those very near and dear to him. Recognizable features? Don't mind if I do. A miraculous birth? The boy who lived? Initiation at a young age? It isn't every day that a young man turns 11. Withdrawal, trial, and quest. Harry feels alienated and must prove himself. Resurrection and return. Awfully Harry Potter-esque, but that is an okay thing. Oftentimes we're going to get these ideas of this hero's journey, the monomyth, from the Bible, and we're going to be able to incorporate that into the literary world, and that's a great thing, because we as readers will feel familiar with this. We will be able to pull these connections together and make something of it. Even if we're not aware that we're doing it, something in our brain will allow us to do it because of the familiarity. Now, another thing we talk about quite a bit on the channel here, especially when we're talking about young adult literature, which, fun fact, if you are not following along with us right now, is all that we are doing, apparently, is the loss of innocence. Now, there comes a point, a pinnacle in a young adult novel where there will always be a loss of innocence, where the character realizes that, maybe they've grown up. Maybe this delicate little fragile world in which they had just lived in illusion is not as great as it once sounds. And that loss of innocence is absolutely the fall of grace. The fall from grace, from page 44 of How to Read Literature Like a Professor, Thomas C. Foster. Another way of saying loss of innocence, of course, is the fall. Adam and Eve, the garden, the serpent, the forbidden fruit. Every story about the loss of innocence is really about someone's private reenactment of the fall from grace, since we experience it not collectively, but individually and subjectively. So every time we get that moment where we're saying, this is the loss of innocence, this is where the character is moving forward into adulthood, seeing the world for what it truly is, we're really referencing the fall from grace. This is a biblical illusion, and that's a great thing. These are where we are starting to tie these pieces together. This is where we're taking the text and pulling from it the context that the author intended, and we're tying it all together, putting a nice pretty bow on it, and saying, hey, there's something more going on here than just what the text is saying. Now, sometimes it is not going to be a readily apparent thing. If I can, from 47 of How to Read Literature Like a Professor, not all uses of religion are straight, of course. Many modern and postmodern texts are essentially ironic. It's a downfall of literature. That's the moment we're in which the allusions to biblical sources are used not to heighten continuities, but heighten continuities between the religious traditions and the contemporary moment, but to illustrate a disparity or disruption. So even if we are using this in an ironic sense, if we are putting in these biblical allusions to poke at the story itself, there's nothing wrong with that. Because again, you are going to be associating that with the reader. The reader is going to pick up on that. And hopefully they'll be able to say, well, that's being used ironically. I understand this a little bit better. Boom. Reading like a professor. How to read books good. I'm here all week. So, this is fine. The reader is using something that they are already readily educated on, if you will. They already have a base familiarity with, and they are using it to make points. Or better yet, the author is using it to make their points. From 49 as well. If I hear something going on in a text that seems to be beyond the scope of the story or poem's immediate dimensions, if it resonates outside itself, I start looking for allusions to older and bigger texts. This is probably, so far in this series, the best quote that Thomas Foster has slung at us. This is what you should be doing when you're reading literature, when you're reading anything, even if you're reading for fun. And believe it or not, the more you do this, the more you practice, the less you will be able to read for fun. That whole sitting down, speed reading through a novel in a couple hours on the beach, it's gone. You're going to be thinking about it a lot more, and that's a good thing. Anytime there is something there that just seems to strike that chord, and Thomas Foster actually goes through an analogy of a rock concert where I believe it's an E major chord or an E minor chord. Once it's strung, man, we know what's happening. We know something big is coming. My English. Once that chord is struck in the reader, that is the immediate notion that there is something more going on here. And we start tracing backwards. Where did this idea come from? How far can we pull it back? And what's the biggest text, the biggest example that we can pull from? And oftentimes, if you can make it this far back, you're going to get back to the standard Bible. And that is why it is important. And that is why oftentimes a lot of literature can be seen within the Bible itself. A lot of times, a lot of things from the Bible can be seen in the book you're reading. Now, I do have a couple of examples here because we always try to have an example of something that we've reviewed on the channel before. First and foremost, we discussed Harry Potter. This is the quintessential hero's journey and the quintessential monomyth. The idea at the end where Dumbledore is resurrecting at King's Cross Station. Readily apparent that we are having some religious symbolism here. Nothing wrong with that. It adds to the story, adds a little bit of spice. If you followed along with James Joyce, Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, you're going to know that Stephen Dedalus has his fall from grace. Stephen Dedalus is going to go through a lot of religious things here, but this is a very heavily religious text. So this is going to be a very simple example, because you're going to find this throughout Portrait of the Artist. Everywhere, there's going to be all kinds of religious symbolism, and that's fine. It's just adding more flavor to the text. It's adding more for the reader. And even simpler than that, sometimes an author will find a passage in the Bible and say, hey, not a bad little title there. Bet I could add something to that. We get The Sun Also Rises, Ernest Hemingway, which, by the way, is one of our top book reviews. If you haven't had a chance to see that before, I would suggest it. But the title itself, The Sun Also Rises, directly comes from the Bible. This is something that authors do. This is something we should be aware of, because if the authors are implanting this into our books, we as readers deserve to give them the respect that they are asking for by saying, hey, let me think about this a little bit. Let me read into it. Let me see what you're actually trying to do with these words. So, we will be back next week here on How to Read Books Good, and we will have Chapter 7 of Thomas C. Foster's How to Read Literature Like a Professor. The title itself, Hansel and Greteldum. Greteldum. That's probably better. Hansel and Greteldum. So we're going to see where that brings us. If you aren't reading along with How to Read Literature Like a Professor, I would highly suggest the book. It is wonderful, and I think you get a lot more from it if you're looking at it itself. There are quotes in here. There are examples. Thomas C. Foster must be a huge fan of Toni Morrison, because Toni Morrison pops up in every single chapter. But there are examples that you'll be able to draw from, maybe some better examples than what we're offering here on Strip Cover Lit, and that's fine, because this is a different readership. This is something, this author has spent his life doing. So he's going to have different examples. He's going to have great examples. Some that you might be familiar with, some that you're not. But I would definitely suggest picking this up and joining us next Friday as we continue forward with How to Read Books Good, a full breakdown of How to Read Literature Like a Professor by Thomas C. Foster. If you like this kind of thing, and perhaps this is the first time you've seen a Strip Cover Lit show, we would suggest you hit the subscribe button down below. We publish a video every single day and plan to do so for the entirety of 2019. If you like to give us a like as well, we always appreciate it. Leave us a comment in the comment section down below, maybe what you thought about this discussion. The comments of this always make me feel great. One more person refers to me as their favorite professor, I'm going to lose it. Makes me happy. And if you'd like to help us create more great content like this here on Strip Cover Lit, there's a link, as always, to our Patreon, to be found in the description below.